to kick off, it would be fantastic to get a quick introduction to yourself and your role at Cordaan, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Kostabi, I'm the CIO of Cordaan. Cordaan is a rather big healthcare provider in the region of Amsterdam. A lot of different types of care that we provide, things like elderly care, but also youth care. In that, a company with like 6,500 employees, more or less 20,000 of clients or patients, so to say, in 125 locations, and we're managing, I think, 7,500 email accounts and almost 10,000 devices, something like that.
When you first started evaluating Tessian as a solution at Cordaan, what were some of the pain points or business problems that you wanted to solve?
Yeah, one of the things, of course, is a broader security question. So it's all about making the right decisions in technical measures, but also, and I think that's the most important catch, to influence behavior and safe behavior. So what we were looking at is solutions, technical solutions, which are technologically advanced, I think, while those solutions are user-friendly. And I think the fun thing would be to have actually real interventions from that technology in unsafe behavior.
Absolutely. And specifically, what were the incidents that drove your interest in Tessian? You know, as you know, we have a variety of different products. We will have spoken about different use cases and outcomes that we could deliver initially. Was there a particular incident or kind of pain point that Cordaan was looking to prevent or solve initially?
No, I don't think it was like one major security incident or something. It was more or less the trend where we were seeing. Of course, because GDPR, we 2 years ago, we did a lot of work on taking the right privacy, but also security measures. So we did a lot, but what we had seen is that the most difficult part was actually to getting into the minds of our employees actually in what safe behavior is or isn't. So, and the difficulty, I think, in healthcare is that what we're stimulating our employees to be service-minded, to help people, and yeah, more or less that's sometimes that's difficult in relation to do the safe things in email or in file management or in people are more or less trained to give an answer if you're asked something. So yeah, if someone maliciously asks something in email, people have the tendency to just answer. And how do you do both? So have a service-minded culture for our clients and patients, but in the meanwhile have a safe mindset in okay, this is not a real request, or this is so I think that's more or less the struggle we had, and that's why we were looking at technologies. I think we were searching for actually technologies that could do more in the space of influencing behavior.
Absolutely. I think what you mentioned there is one of the fundamental behaviors of humans, which is that we are trusting, and in an environment like Cordaan, users are both trusting and they are by default serving their clients.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the kind of behavior that attackers are looking to take advantage of, unfortunately. And so when those employees are unaided, it can be very difficult for them to remain secure. And Cass, how had Cordaan tried to solve these problems previously around user behavior on email? Had you implemented any technologies to try to give people secure method or ways of being secure, for example?
Yeah. So what we did until now, until we did business with Tessian, I think is we try to do the all standard stuff. So standard email security, standard spam filtering. I think we do have a more or less good incident management process in which if we see strange stuff, we are noticing people. But yeah, that's reactive. So that's more or less. We did have a lot of measures, I think, which are reactive. If we see spam or we see, we have seen people reacting to questions of okay, just give us your Office 365 account, and then we're looking and we're seeing that those requests were all coming from somewhere East Europe. And that's not behavior you would expect from a Amsterdam-based healthcare organization. So I think we did a lot, but the thing is that it wasn't real time or just in time, because and therefore it was reactive. So we were looking to do more proactively in warning people just in time, but I think also it's also about awareness. So people can read, and so other measures were like all kinds of procedures and so people did know what they should do, but in real life, in the heat of the moment, getting email and then having top of mind, okay, this is allowed, or this isn't allowed, is not something, which people do by themselves, so they have to get used to it or trained in that. And we saw that we're having a lot of effort in that, and still people weren't showing real safe behavior, and I think they don't do that in purpose. So that's more or less unawareness or by accident. While if you could point people out that stuff isn't a good idea, then people would actually feel what they're doing, and I think they would also try by their own motivation to change their behavior. So that's more or less, I think, the real trick here.
Absolutely. Your employees have the best intentions in the world, but without something that's reminding them to stay secure, reminding them that they may be engaging with someone that they don't realize they're engaging with, for example, it's very difficult for them to execute on those intentions.
Yeah.
Specifically, just one more question on that point in terms of what Cordaan had done to try to solve these problems previously. It'd be great to hear a bit about what you tried to do to secure outbound email. I know that you have secure methods of sending, for example. There are certain things that users in theory aren't allowed to send over email by policy, but you were still kind of seeing that people weren't using those methods of sending and were sending information that they shouldn't.
Yeah, so actually we did have some, and still do have some measures. So for instance, secure email is something more or less a healthcare-based solution in which we can send email securely between connected healthcare organizations in Amsterdam, for instance. So actually that does work, but the thing is that you can still send an email by mistake safely then, so you can still send encrypted content which is not intended for the recipient, and so we didn't have any mechanism in place that would point out that you're making a mistake. For instance, we did see that a lot of data leak reports were about sending stuff to the wrong recipient. I think actually, to be fair, everyone in business has done something like this in the past. So you can still do that. And I think the other thing is that, actually the strange thing is that in these weird times with COVID, people are actually also doing things by their best intentions. So sending stuff to their home email account to print stuff because they aren't at the office, they are at home sometimes. But still you're sending reports or forms which are business confidential or even patient confidential to your private email address to print it. So that you have the best intention, but in the meanwhile, I don't have control as an IT boss here about those email accounts. I do have control of the Cordaan email accounts. So I think all those things I can say, okay, you're not allowed, and pointed out or getting another memo through the organization about this. But I think it's about if you're in the mud, so to say, if you're on the spot, then you have to think about, okay, so this is not a good idea to send this. And that's something difficult also in times of stress also.
Completely agree. And that's something that we're hearing a lot, is that the additional stresses of the current environment, which are particularly acute for an organization like Cordaan, given that you're delivering healthcare in this environment. These user behaviors that are problematic at the best of times are now even more manifest. And Cas, I know you've touched on it to an extent, but it'd be great to hear a bit more about why Tessian appealed as a solution compared to some of the alternative approaches that you'd looked at and some of the approaches that you're already using at Cordaan.
So I think more or less in our search for innovative technologies, in a way we just found each other, I think. And then evaluating those technology, this technology, pointed out, I think, two things. The first thing is there is real artificial intelligence in this technology, which is actually something really else than doing stuff like, okay, I am creating the business rules and setting that in some kind of a spam filter or email security solution, and those rules are then policed actually by the technology. And although that can work, that is something like, okay, so if then you will get a game of like, okay, can the employees find new ways which I don't know for now to take a detour around those business rules actually in the solution. So that's something in which, like, my intelligence or the intelligence of our security officer is actually the more or less the breaking point or the success factor of how secure we would be. I think getting real analysis of email and real artificial intelligence about behavior as implemented in the Tessian technologies we'll also find stuff which we actually didn't know until now, and in the future. It is also something which, a part of policing rules, it's also getting information about behavior which we didn't have. For instance, even how much email is going out there and coming in. How much email is actually sent to private email addresses, to the point of which language are people using in their normal communication, and if that deviates in a new communication, what are they doing? That's so we can warn people or point it out. That's I think one. And the other thing I think is that one of the pitfalls maybe in security is prohibit all kinds of stuff. So of course there is stuff which is actually really not allowed, really bad, and okay, that's we have to really police that, or that's one. But the second thing is that because people aren't doing a lot of stuff, they aren't doing it on purpose, and they just are unaware about the risks there are. I think it's nice that you could have more a leveled or nuanced approach in the response, in the intervention. So you could say with these kinds of technology, you could say, hey, you're sending this. Are you sure you want to send this? And if it's really bad, you can just block it. So like a pop-up, like this is blocked because it's really bad. As the belief is, and that's more or less, I think, what I like about Tessian as a company, that it's influencing behavior is at its strongest point if people are doing the right things themselves, instead of that people are pointing out or giving fines, about that stuff they shouldn't do. I think that's more or less the key selling points, I think, of Tessian for us.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Cass. As you say, I think that is the key selling point, or one of the key selling points of Tessian is that it's influencing user behavior, but fundamentally in a way that's there to help them predominantly rather than to police them. When we went through the kind of process of getting approval on starting the partnership between Tessian and Cordaan and making the investment in Tessian, kind of one of the steps we went through was getting approval from Cordaan's board.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to hear kind of to what extent the problems that Tessian solves for resonated with the board, and kind of what elements of the technology made the board want to move forward with the investment.
Yeah, so the difficult thing, I think, within healthcare, and that's, I'm not sure if that's specific for our environment in the Netherlands, but so it's publicly funded. So that means that if I have to invest more in technology, making more expenses, then you would have the challenge to just earn that back. Huh? So and therefore, more or less, investing a lot in technologies, and for instance in security technologies, is a challenge. I think what did really resonate is actually really that behavioral part, because they should and they do trust me enough to take my word if I'm saying that technology is the right technology. Yeah, that's one. But then how is that enough for making an investment like this? And I think what really does resonate is the added value of this technology, which is really influencing behavior. And I think that really resonates in the actually the business decision or the business case, actually. And I think also what we do see is that regulatory bodies are getting more interested in how stuff is going on in healthcare, but also in the GDPR topic, So I think it's also a bit about compliance, and I think the feeling that this would help Cordaan and us to do more in the compliance field. So I think those both worlds. But again, the key selling point here is I think that it's a technology which is really doing interventions or actually interaction with the users and employees.
Absolutely, I remember that being the key element that really resonated. And I suppose it's just related to what you were saying there, Cass, around it doesn't necessarily earn itself back in the same way that certain other investments that the board will be considering does. Kind of when you were thinking about the ROI of Tessian for Cordaan, what were the kind of the key points that you were thinking about?
Yeah, so ROI it could be about will I get more money out of it, or more revenue, you know, so that's difficult then but the other way around, you know, so if you're doing like a proper risk management calculation, you know, so if you would do, okay, what's the maximum fine we could get times the chance we will get a fine like that, so that's low because we do all kinds of stuff already, but you know, that's one thing, huh? So you could actually calculate the risk before and after the investment in Tessian. So that's one thing to look at it. The other thing is, and that's the indirect value, is the behavior. Well, we also, and I think the indirect value is also that people, so employees at Cordaan, are feeling that they are assisted by stuff, huh? So you know, we can now also do fun stuff like, okay, send a notification that people are forgetting their attachments, or so you know. So what you're actually doing is helping people to do the right thing, and I think people are feeling assisted if they are assisted by the technology, instead of, you know, having having that feeling in the back of your mind, okay, am I doing the right stuff? So that yeah, I think that's an indirect value, so that's difficult to calculate, but I think the real thing forward then would be to just make your business case with all those different arguments, and if you add it up, then, you know, it's more or less, I think it makes sense to do the investment then. In the case of Cordaan, it did.
Great, thanks Akash. Just one final question, just a very quick one, but we went through a proof of value exercise with Cordaan, and it'd be great to just hear briefly how the deployment was of the proof of value, and how quickly you saw results or value in that exercise.
Yeah, it was actually really fun because we did a proof of value with, I think, more or less 10% of the total users. I think what did help actually is to do that in a manner in which we were free from commercials. So we were just getting the project to do the project, to see if it has value and if it works at Cordaan. And what we did actually see was actually really exciting, but also a bit frightening, because a bit scary, because now we did see stuff going on which we actually didn't know until then. So we did actually see how much email is sent to private email addresses. Or so we did know that some things were going on, but the scale of it wasn't really transparent for us, I think, and now it did. So it really accelerated the pace in which we want to do something about it, I think. But also, I think the whole dashboarding stuff, that what you're actually seeing in what's happening, and also people were we could also see that people were actually starting already to just press the no button. Huh? Do you still want to send this email? No. And that's interesting, because there are people actually getting to make new choices which they didn't make before. And so even with 10% of the user group, or of the total user group of Cordaan, we were seeing those kinds of new behaviors and influencing of the behavior. So I think that's also, I think, a real good thing to do. Maybe you should just do that always, you know. So just do a proof of value. And I also like the value stuff, because normally we do call these kinds of things proof of concept, you know. So then it's more or less a concept. But here we want to prove the value. If that's direct or indirect, that doesn't matter. Just try to see if it has that value, which we thought it had. So, and it did. So that really helps also in making your case in at the board for getting the financials approved, you know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cass. That's been really, really helpful. Appreciate your time today. Great speaking with you as ever.